So welcome everybody. Rupa ji has just come after driving from Delhi. I'm giving her 5 minutes to catch her breath. So as she does that, so this is a very important last session. We've had an amazing 2.5 days. The energy yesterday was, I have not seen that energy for a very long time. 9:30, I could see everybody discussing, debating, coming up with where are the ideas to move ahead. That's what we needed. And I think it was really fantastic to see that in action. Very clear what you have, Rupaji, in this room right now are people who are passionate about water, about sanitation, about and concerned about the problem of climate change as it is coming closer and closer to our homes. The work that many people in this room have done is outstanding in terms of how to manage fecal sludge, how to do it at scale, how to do it in a way that we can get rural-urban convergence. How can we do it in a way that we can actually make sure that the treated water is reused? What is the new system when it comes to climate change for the management and the conservation of water? And then, of course, what do we do with resource recovery and how do we make sure that happens more and more? And I think that's the range of issues that we have discussed over the last 2 days. What we will do in this session and is to, I will ask all the chairs of the groups, and I've been told, as democracy is, that the chairs have been changed, which is nice. And so I will call upon different faces to present and have them present what was the outcome that came out of yesterday evening's discussion. 5 working groups, all along the themes that we want to work towards for the future. So we will hear all the chairs in terms of what were the ideas. And the basic brief that we had given was what is the idea for scaling up, the barriers, the opportunities for scaling up, what is the research agenda that we want to advance, and what is the collaboration that we want to advance. So 3 broad areas so that we can get an understanding as we move ahead. I would then like to welcome at that point Rupa ji. But Rupa ji, for a moment, if you give us a minute, we'd like to give you a bag as a gift and also to thank you very much for making the journey from Delhi. We're really grateful that you're here. Harsh. The reason we wanted Rupaji here, and I'm being very frank with all of you, you're part of the community, so you need to know. We have Chaurasya ji here, who has been really fantastic over the last 2.5 days, worked with us, engaged with us. We have been able to share with him. Rupaji has been critical in the drafting of the SPM 2.0 guidelines. Now, in my first day when I talked about the SPM 2.0 guidelines, if you remember my slide, I had talked about how policy changes, and it is when policy changes that practice also changes. The change in the policy, which became technology agnostic, which essentially told cities that we are interested in the outcome. We are not interested anymore in a prescription on whether it is underground, whether it is overground, whether it is STP, whether it is FSTP. We want every drop of wastewater to be intercepted, to be treated, and most importantly, the policy says we want resource recovery to happen. Now that's a huge, huge change. And to all my friends from Africa, from Nepal, from Bangladesh, I think this is something that we need to see happen more in policy. Because as you all know, a policy is a key driver for practice at scale. We can practice at a small level, but when you want to amplify it and you want to move towards a complete change in paradigm, it only comes when the policy moves. So I think for a moment, if I will ask you, can you give Rupaji a big hand for the work she did for drafting? And Rupaji, there was an absolute change in perspective. So don't, we are people who've been working in this for many, many years. And we really say that to you. We say it with you with total appreciation. That thank you so much for helping us to be able to walk that extra mile. And that's really where the policy has helped us to do so. Since then, we had Matiji here in the first day. We heard from Matiji what an amazing revolution that is happening in Odisha, where they have decided to do it at scale. We are hearing this also from other states that they are beginning. And again, for us, we are also technology agnostic. We want every drop of sewage to be treated. So how that happens, what happens, that is the conversation that we've had over here. And I think it's been an amazing last 2.5 days. And I hope this session will also be amazing. Because if it isn't, we are all going to go back feeling, oh, bahut acha tha, but kya nikla? What came out of it? And that's really what the purpose of this session is. So please put on your thinking hats. When I open up the floor for the last session, for the last opening, you need to sharpen anything that we have missed out in terms of how do we move forward. This is a moving forward session. It's not a statement of the problem. It is about how we move forward. So with that, can I, Rupaji, if you allow me, I will invite the chairs to come and present their thing, and then I will ask you to speak. So let me first invite Jay Bhagwan. Jay Rupaji is from South Africa, so you will see that in his accent as he speaks. Yesterday, somebody got very confused. Who got very confused? Param got very confused. Jay had launched into his thing about how, we don't understand this. We have got no urban population. Why are we focusing so much on rural? And then I had to tell Param, it's South Africa. Please don't think this is India. So this is a different perspective. So Jay is the Executive Manager, Water Use and Waste Management at the Water Research Commission. This is a government commission set up by the South African government to guide policy in South Africa on water management. So Jay will present the first working group on non-sewage sanitation treatment systems and solutions.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity. I'm just a messenger. I want to thank a whole lot of people in the group. Yeah. Yeah. Please take accountability. Yeah. Okay, so I must thank them because they did all the talking. I just took the notes, so I'm going to interpret. The first questions we were asked is, what are the lessons from the ground on FSM efficacy? Because we tend to focus on the blind spot too much, what the problems are, etc., rather than finding the good lessons and building on them. So the first one in India, and I'm appreciated because I'm learning over this very short space of time that one thing that makes this wheel turn is good political leadership. And we need to acknowledge that, one of the lessons from this whole initiative in India is a very strong political will and leadership, okay? And that has resulted in very good national policy and systems that in a way enable and stimulate state policies and implementation. So the structure was quite, useful in that. But of course, somebody made, I don't want to go into the negatives. Let me leave that out, the part of that. What it also created after a very long gap in the sanitation space, that fecal sludge management provides a working alternative to a problem that was invisible. And that is very key, that all this attention and realization brought the issue of the poor largely, but also the issue of the urban into the spotlight around preserving the environment and managing this problem more effectively. The fourth very key thing in India is the strong institutionalization of the FSM practice. And that means there was a small transition of the cohort, of the departments, etc., to build FSM practices in the institutional mechanisms. And in many places, it's always treated as an ad hoc activity. And this mainstreaming, the policy, the activities, the Swachh Bharat, etc., saw an element of institutionalization that's starting to build the sustainability and the platform. And linked to that was all the kind of innovative techniques of clustering smaller ULBs in the rural and urban areas that help to scale up and create this enabling environment. But also very key, I mean, you cannot achieve and turn this wheel in a big way if there's no subsidies. And government came to the party, okay, with the financial investment to ensure that the FSM setup and some of the O&M were the first elements to move this wheel. So, getting the hardware and the tools set up, the trucks, the emptying, all those kind of things are very key elements when you want to see an outcome. I mean, it's not all there, but it started this catalyst. So it's very key to recognize that subsidization in a smart way has started and enabled this, and people will transition to see the value of the service and start paying for it as it grows in the future. Then some innovative practices around evolving around scheduled desludging and using those kind of techniques in the interim as you use the AI platforms and IoTs, etc., to make the system much smarter. And very important, very quick adaptation of bylaws at a local level, at a panchayat level, etc., that also streamline the process to be kind of engaged. So from the group, that was the kind of exhaustive list of very good lessons we picked up that should be built on and taken forward, but also for others from other places in the world to learn from how India is evolving on this issue. The second question was, which treatment system needs to be procured and sort of supported? It's a very difficult question. I mean, and we had a lot of discussion. And what we converged to firstly is that we need to be technology agnostic. I mean, you just can't say nature-based solutions are the best. I mean, it's horses for courses. You look at the situation, you look at the economics, you look at the conditions, etc. But the key elements and drivers should be affordability, inclusivity, and efficiency as outcomes, because technology can achieve that for you. So we didn't say just choose one technology. There's different situations of cold treatment and all those things. You have to apply your mind rather than just issue a standard and say, everyone will do this, and you have more chaos. The other things that we started seeing is, the introduction of settling thickening tanks as a first primary kind of intervention that help the other processes on the FSM treatment become more innovative and more efficient in terms of polishing and those kind of things. So there was some smart ideas around that, innovation around the sludge drying beds and the management of that. I don't know what NBS is my handwriting, but I'm going to skip. Right? Yeah, and adopting and infusing nature-based solutions, at least in the back end for polishing the effluent that you could comply and meet the standards and regulations in terms of discharge in that. And then the other important part was, making land available for this FSTPs, etc. I mean, many countries, land is premium, and especially land near municipalities and within municipalities. So in this whole process of the legislation, etc., more needs to be done around making land available closer to the cities in a more smarter way, okay? And think like Singapore, if you can't do it on the top, do it at the bottom. It's possible, to drive the economics and those kind of things. What is also needed on the way forward is extensive capacity building for FSM applications. You know, you still have this tension between wastewater professionals trying to manage sludge and have very little understanding of sludge economics, dynamics, etc. So we need to build this cohort of specialists that deal with managing FSM chains, etc., because it's very different from sewage and wastewater treatment. And you're always arguing with a wastewater treatment specialist who's been there for years and think that the characteristics of fecal sludge is exactly the same as wastewater treatment. And you don't win in that situation. So building this cohort and skills and specialists is very key in actually transitioning this industry and its application much further. The aspect of more inclusivity around gender representation in terms of sanitation, and there were very good case studies in Orissa, etc., around how the gender and the transgender actually facilitated the greater uptake of and the management of it, because we have a problem in many other places in the world where this is not used in a meaningful way. So it can, because there's a gender element that cares around the sanitation and those kind of aspects. Then the safety of sanitation workers came up, and though there is an attention to it, it still needs further development and enforcement to ensure that people don't take shortcuts and still jump in the pits and do all those kind of things, that you open up other pathways. So there were good examples on it, but there's more that needs to be regulated and standardized right across the other states in India in terms of application. Then it's always a gap. When you start this thing, people forget to develop baseline data. They all run, and it's fragmented. So there should be a little bit of pause and say, let's build the baseline data properly, that when we come to report, we are reporting from one page, rather than somebody picks up data and say, I did these 3 things, and you're getting to an argument to say, but your data is like this and that. You have a systematic approach, because data is very key in moving things forward. Then someone mentioned that we still need to work out what should be the standard size of septic tanks if you're going to make the business of fecal sludge management efficient, because that affects the frequency of emptying, the number of time you run trips, etc., etc., etc. So working out that smartly for the country will also work out the logistics and the cost and the management of the systems. Because there was argument that, yes, we're building all these FSTPs, but they're under capacity. Why? Because if your receptacle is not properly designed, you're going to have under capacity. So the input system needs to be designed with the output system in mind, so that becomes key, and we can manipulate those kind of design elements. Understanding the population dynamics and important of growing the ISO codes and evolving them as the practice improves, because it's not about keeping it minimum all the time and making all the mistakes, but also moving them that the performance and the compliance improves, that you get to a point of where the environment doesn't have the consequences. And lastly, again, the desludging logistics are going to become the Achilles heel in the future. Price of petrol is going to go up. If you keep building FSTPs 20 kilometers out of the city, you will start feeling the pain of the service, etc. So really rethinking smartly from a policy perspective, etc., how you sort that part of the heel, because otherwise this whole business is going to collapse very quickly. So that was some. Is there any more? No, there's more. Okay, so very quickly, the other recommendation is, formalization of informal service provision, good design guidelines for FSTP, not standards. good design guidelines so people can adapt within that, bringing on SOPs for operation and maintenance, for reuse that will enable the outcome you want to see. Use of, I don't know what TOT is, it's my handwriting, but training of trainers for operation and maintenance. Continue the good knowledge sharing, because I think if you don't have a cross learning culture, then the pockets of intellectualism and etc. remain, and you don't get that, to grow. Good planning, land acquisition and site selection is something that needs to be attended to. And, the availability of resource is always going to be a key factor. You don't fund once in a year. This problem needs a long-term strategic financing. And with that, I talked about the court and the HR and etc. to really serve this industry in a meaningful way. So if I hope I got it.
They're really left out, which is very, very important.
And my English was good. My English was good.
Your English is so helpful. They come and join us so that we can get now, after this working group 2, Arne has asked Romini, or rather Romini is now in charge. Romini is from CPP Bangalore. So we work from there, it improves, your group tells us, scale. Yes.
Hi everyone. So this is, I'm just a messenger here as Jay said. So I'll be presenting what our team discussed. Our team had a lot of people who are starting from Arnia, who has a lot of experience, and we had a Ramakrishna who was like just 2 years in the sector. So we tried to bring in all the aspects of a policy. It may be already existing, but let's say if we are going to develop a policy, what are this should address for non-sewage sanitation system? So we said first, let's look at it as all our policy will start with in the context of providing sanitation to all. Then before we start with the policy, also we did a lot of discussion on what is non-sewage sanitation. Are we talking only on FSTP or even decentralized systems? So the team altogether, we decided, we talk about not just only FSTP, also the decentralized systems other than the centralized solution. So that's where we end up, and then we started our discussion. So these are a theme that we work. I'll go one by one. So starting with enabling policy. So we said, we know already like a lot of centralized systems or sewer systems comes with a lot of incentivizes. So, but when it comes to NSS or a decentralized systems, we don't see that kind of incentive. So we started saying that there has to be an equity between both the systems. There has to be legislation and regulations that provides a criteria when we go for NSS, when we go for, when I say SS is a centralized, and bylaws on setting up of most of this decentralized system. Financial arrangement starting from infrastructure. So we saw yesterday, previous day, Suraj was presenting a lot of maps. If you're looking at a planning level, I think those are the things that are very important. So we should also have a lot of emphasis on bringing a lot of softwares, administrative, CSP all together, so that there is a clear planning for a city to move ahead. Consideration of socio-economic conditions, because this is something that we really have to look at it when they're coming to a sanitation planning. Institutional arrangement, so who will do what, creating the mandates, responsibility, and as well as accountability, because today it only talks about responsibility. Accountability is something need to really lay down in our policy. Monitoring after the implementation. Also, the policy should also given a different level. So we start with, we say, if it is a metro cities, what is that policy? We'll talk about it. If it is a small cities, class 1, class 2 cities, how? So based on the density, based on the population, we really have to come up with a differential policy. Convergence, where do we go for NSS? Where do we go for SS? Enforcement, because most of us know we have policy, but when it comes to enforcement, that's a weak point. So we have to look at more on enforcement mechanism. give it more on capacity development activity for as well as ULB and service provider and service receivers. Strengthening and data governance. This is again coming from the lot of data that even Jay talked about it. So we also tried to lay down some of the planning process, how we can go with selecting systems. First is the data suitability analysis, stakeholder consultation, talk to all of them, understanding what is current situation, what we can do. City sanitation plan, which was earlier there, maybe now we have to little bit more focused and study, then go for DPR instead of going to DPR and then start planning it. So let's go with CSP, little more focused, and then start the DPR. Plus private sector ecosystem development, which will be a major stakeholder in our whole enabling policy. In case of administrative change, what kind of change that we expect? I think we have to just move to the decentralized agenda of 74th Amendment. So more focus on giving more power to the class 2, class 3 cities, because we know metro cities somehow they're able to manage their sewage when it comes to whether it's a centralized or decentralized. But when it comes to smaller cities, I think that's where we need a lot of focus on getting their capacity developed. Enforcement of the policy, like very clear on incentivize and penalty. Budgeting of data, because that's need a lot of funding. So if we can do that in our administrative thing. Bottom-up approach, because this other, again, coming up from smaller cities where smaller cities has to be, given an option to select what they exactly they required based on their context, because if it is mostly coming from up to bottom, so probably we see they may not be agreed to that. So if it is selective from the city and then goes up, then there'll be much more ownership that will come. This very specifically came up in most of our conversation is that the land acquisition, because that's something that we really struggle when it comes to sanitation systems. So probably that need to be easen out. So maybe it can be done in a simplified way so that the land acquisition become easy. Political change agenda, there are few cases that we discussed about. There is a lot of, in some cases, we get a lot of buy-in from the politicians who can support in these kind of projects. But on other side, you also have where even if the administrative work, people agree, but political support will not be getting. So getting their buy-in become very important. And other funding when it comes to, I think even there are a lot of MLA, MP fund that is existing can be tapped into a lot of our sanitation projects. This is the other thing that we talk. And consensus building, because anything with a stakeholder, we feel that the political thing will really force us to do a lot of implementation work. So what kind of research we need? One is about, we talked last 2 days about the standards and also we thought maybe we need to have a lot of research also looking at other countries or other regions, what they are doing in terms of the standards based on the city, how we go with the application, enforcement of, enhancement of the tools. We talked about FSM tools. So can we enhance it so that it can be, used, simplified and then used in the sanitation planning? Technology matrix, when to go for what technologies, whether it's FSTP, STP, decentralized system for a different context. Innovation in data collection and reporting. So can we look at better way of data collection, whether it's a simple Android-based data collection or even going back to the older event. So looking at more ideas on how to collect the data and reporting. Collaboration. So South to South collaboration, because we had a lot of African friends who were actually talking about their sanitation policy and guidelines. Maybe we can refer to it and see how we can learn from their experience. Inter and intrasectoral integration, because sanitation, you'll not be looking at solo because you will have water, agriculture, because it will be more of a closing the loop approach. So we have to look at more of integration of the sectors, coordination among the actors, public-private partnership engagement. This is where we said a lot of discussion went ahead. And then more of our research, we may need a lot of academic collaboration and lab collaboration to do much more, technical solution coming up with. So this is more what we discussed in our group. If I missed anything, please team add.
Excellently presented. And I'm sure there will be questions when I open it up. So I think at the moment, take the chair and then we'll bring everyone. Working group 3, Vandana is going to present for the challenge, so that is good. And this is about way forward from inclusive urban sanitation.
Forward. Thank you. Good afternoon. So we are here to bring to you our internal discussion on the way forward. It's specifically for urban sanitation. And the purpose is to ensure inclusive and equitable service to the customer who has been identified as vulnerable and needy. So this is what we are focusing on. And to start with, what we'd like to suggest is, like Jay also did, that an adapted bylaw, or in our case, we're suggesting that the ULBs need to maybe create bylaws with the purpose of regulating and monitoring. And the bylaws would be regulatory, therefore, in nature, and also financial, with a tilt towards both, to ensure that we're establishing, we're creating, or we're formulating standards to both establish and to monitor. So from an establishing point of view, like I think the other presentations also said, is formalizing what we call the service provider or the desludgers. That gives them a certain standing and stature, which allows then the ULB through its regulations to monitor, which is, I think, the key outcome. One of the issues articulated was that sludge is picked up, but never reaches the treatment plant. So how do you monitor this? If you formalize them, you have better control on what's happening, including what we talked about was maybe GPSs on their vehicles. The other purpose is to break monopolies, because in the informal, unorganized sector, that tends to happen. And supporting, again, the service provider is by assuring payments, whether it is, using an app or whatever it is, but to assure the payments, because part of the reason why they don't perform the job that they're meant to in this cycle is because a lag in payments. Simultaneously with these regulations, to ensure that we are not increasing their burden of compliances, because given the scale at which they operate and the background some of them come from, it becomes an unnecessary burden and becomes a hindrance to the job. So if we marry each of these regulations with how it's going to affect the financial side, when you formalize the desludgers, you actually make them available, or you make available for them credit. They can then take loans. They can then be supported in their venture with whether it's purchase of trucks or, managing their salaries, as the case may be. And when you break monopolies, you bring it in with the lens of a PPP to make sure that it's not completely controlled by the ULB or the municipal corporation, or completely privatized, where the customer or the needy or the vulnerable then becomes a sufferer rather than a beneficiary of the system. Also, in the approach to reducing the burden on the service provider and the desludger, you provide them insurance, which has been talked about largely, which is that you look out for the sanitary workers. And also what we've talked about here on the financial side is that we work towards creating market maturity. One of the points raised was that, oh, I'm sorry, back? Okay. Okay, my mistake. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the market maturity is something which then will help create models for successful upscaling. Because if your market's not ready for either performing the job of being the service provider or the end use of the products, treated wastewater as well as sludge, how are you going to upscale? Because that's what we're looking at, is how do you what's the way forward on this? So that is both the policy on regulations as well as the financial side. And the assurance of payments not only comes from maybe an app, but also possibly on creating some kind of a cess, which is then parked with the ULB. The ULB then pays out to the service provider, and also an incentive. But the incentive also needs to be on the customer oblique end user side, something to incentivize them to participate in this process. Moving ahead, we have, where do we therefore need to focus on for research? one of the things that came out since we're looking at the needy and the vulnerable is that they tend to be in urban areas which are not planned, which are really at the end of the spectrum of even being irregular or illegal housing settlements. So one of the things that we need to look at is how do we zone the location of the treatment plant to ensure that it's not going to become on a burden to the service provider from a distance and transportation point of view, which could also be looking at community level transfer stations. That maybe you don't expect them to go 30, 40 kilometers. Maybe you look at them going up to an intermediary point and then from there. And also, I think we need research to first identify the good practices and then amplify them. Moving ahead to the collaborations that we're suggesting, one of the things is, I mean, we want to research to create the agendas. So the collaboration should be with maybe end users. We talked about, maybe the end users of the treated water and the fecal sludge. What capacity do they have to consume? What price point works for them? If you can collaborate with them, you can come out with an agenda that then moves into research to say, okay, now we need more research on like a zone-wise consumption and price point conversation. Also, one of the things was, again, coming from, looking out for your sanitation workers, to look at the local capacity, engage with the local community, identify leaders, and you're not just looking at, the best performing service provider, but you're also looking at this best served community. You're looking at people who've risen from the community, felicitate them, recognize them. And through them, the advocacy needs to be engaged. Advocacy needs to be, scaled up and strengthened, because that's where your change is going to happen from. Create federations again from the north-south point of view also, from the south-south point of view also. So that sharing of learning is very swift, efficient, and, like we've all been talking about, let's not keep reinventing the wheel. And same thing of like, build a forum so that we can engage at the level of coming up with workable solutions. And I think equally importantly, sharing our failures, because what hasn't worked in one area needs to be shared so another zone or another area doesn't have to go through that pain again. So this is, I think, what we put together. Am I missing anything? Does anyone want to add anything? So I think our group missed standing up. So if I can request you all to stand up, because we had a lot of people who
Lot of
joined in
people.
and created
Wonderful.
a very robust exchange of ideas.
So can I challenge the first three groups before I move to the fourth, because we'll move to biosolids. So one of the questions I had raised, and I can see that there are points in each one of the groups on it, is the issue of price and cost. Okay. Cost issue in desludging, and we need to make it inclusive. There is a cost issue in running the plant and to make that economically viable. Now, many states are coming up with a solution to say, I mean, there are different models in India. And one of the things I think the group is also recommending, and many others, we should start learning from what those models are. But the understanding we're getting, for instance, there are two different models. One is a model where a state has said, we are setting it up, we will run it, and then we will give it to a self-help group or any other group to run it, but it's within state management, okay? The entire paraphernalia supported, subsidized is within the state, much the transport vehicles, everything. So it's a state operation. One is that model. And I'm looking at it because Rupaji and we have worked a lot on solid waste. And we've also come up with different models when it comes to solid waste. One is an integrated model. State collects, state transport, state brings it for processing. The other is the model where the state is essentially saying that we are giving the plant operator the right to collect the FSTP, and they will charge for desludging. And that cost for desludging will also be the cost that they will use for making their plant run. Okay, that's the second model that is emerging. Our critique of that model has been that the cost for desludging is so high that it will never be paid and people will evade the system. They will either not pay it or the desludger will continue to operate and the plant will become an white elephant like many STPs have become. There is a third model where the state is beginning to do, it's a combination of the two, and the state is essentially saying that the informal sector for desludging will continue and they will bring the sludge to the plant and the plant will then be run by through another economics, okay, through the subsidy that is given by the state to run the plant. So they've delinked desludging operation from the plant operation. One of the ideas, and Rupaji, you could think about this as well with your experience also with solid waste, and that's where I'm coming to, is one idea that I have been telling my colleagues is, even though in solid waste, we are saying no to tipping fee, can we include, I mean, we'll need to, I'm not looking for prescription right now because we need to experiment on a lot. But one idea could be to think about a tipping fee so that you actually get the operator, informal sector, to bring the septage, the fecal sludge to the plant. There's an incentive there. That, of course, will make the plant economics even more difficult. Now, our data is showing that the plant economics is not very costly. We've looked at all different plants. The O&M, I'm forgetting CapEx, I'm looking at O&M costs. Not very expensive, okay? So how does that get paid? I think that will be, is there, before I move to the other groups, the first three groups or anyone else on this issue, any ideas that you have to share? Because this clearly is one thing that we as a group, as a community, have to come up with better ideas and better thoughts, because this is going to be a policy issue that will need to be discussed as we go on. Any strong thoughts on this? Yes, Param, and then yes, both of you. Yes, I'll come to you as well. Param, please take.
So I strongly believe that as far as fecal sludge operation is concerned, whether it's a plant operation of the cesspool vehicle itself, government will continue to subsidize. Just the way we are subsidizing our dry and wet waste collection, because these are economically not a very viable option, but it's a public good which has to be done. Now, to what extent can some revenue be generated? That is the question. But at no point of time will the revenue, if we consider that as a revenue, meaning the money collected from the household level for every cesspool machine going and desludging that money at no point of time will be viable unless the house is just across the door of the FSTP plant. In that case, there is no much of a transportation involved. There is much regulation and things like that. So the model will continue to be some kind of a government subsidy. Now, the question is, what will be the most economical model?
Yes.
Provided that government is going to subsidize, what will be the most economical model so that the financial burden is weaker?
And how do you ensure that in that subsidy, you get integrity in the process?
Yes.
That you don't end up with subsidizing and the plant does not operate. So do you move towards processing? So I think that good point, Param. I'm going to ask you to just hold.
No, just to
Okay,
continue, ma'am, I
yes.
need to complete. One more thing regarding when you are talking of the model 2 and 3 as a
Huh.
hybrid, I really don't see it as a hybrid.
Okay.
Whether the entire end-to-end operation is government run, meaning the plant along with the cesspool machine and everything is government run, or some of the cesspool machines are partly government owned. Government means ULB or whichever agency, and partly private owned, and
Okay.
everything being monitored, or in certain ULBs where they have never had any government owned cesspool vehicles. Therefore, many private vehicles are operational. Therefore, they are tagging it. That whatever the case may be, that means only in the last scenario where there is no government cost fixed for trip evacuation, there can be a real market scenario where houses are also desperate to evacuate it. Economically payable households all are having septic tanks, so they are financially well off. Therefore, whatever market rate prevails will continue. But if we are looking at this as a public good, where we want to ensure, number one, manual scavenging has to be stopped. Number two, that means everybody, even the lower economic strata, would like to send it to our treatment system, then some kind of subsidy should.
Very
continue.
good. Thank you. Excellent answer. Yes, I have you. I have 4 names and that's it. I can't open this up. I'm going to ask my friend from Africa and I'm going to ask
Okay, I'm
you,
sorry.
and
This
then-
was
yes.
exactly the point I was going to make, that
Then
it
can
is
you
a public
hold
service and we should not aim
Wonderful.
for 100%.
Excellent. I had Sunaina at the back, right at the back. Yes, please. From Kenya.
Thank you. I think the issue of private sector has been touched on. A model from Africa that was recently launched is known as the Africa Investment Program. So this is a large-scale continental investment program in water and sanitation that is being supported by the various leaders on the continent. So it seeks to first analyze, of course, the countries, analyze the needs, do the governance assessments. I will continue stressing on the issue of governance. If the governance issues are not sorted out, you cannot de-risk and you cannot look investment ready or credit worthy. So what they're doing, countries, preparing their systems and at the same time matchmaking with different investors. So this is one way they have found in terms of supporting and resourcing the sector. There have been successful cases in about 2 countries, Zambia and Zanzibar so far, that have been done. So this is something that can be looked at. And this equally speaks to probably the need for a consolidated sanitation policy guideline. I saw there being mentioned the Africa Sanitation Policy Guideline, which speaks to the entire continent and then is localized within various countries. There was so much information here, but I noticed there was a lot of fragmentation at the policy level. There may be a need to consolidate it, and then at the same time, the establishment of a similar investment program or a similar pool that could help resource the sector.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. I have the last speaker. Yes, Jyoti? Manish, for a friend from Africa. Hi, can you?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you very much. You see, I'm a little bit puzzled when we talk about tipping fee to be paid by the treatment plant to the person discharging there.
Yeah.
And my opinion is that this is very difficult. And I want to share an example of how we do it in Uganda, which is quite successful.
Mhm.
For us, what we need is just to look for money, government, get money, whether by a donor or whether by taxes, and build a fecal sludge treatment plant. Once that one is built, it is the emptiers who must pay a dumping fee for the operations of the treatment plant. How do they do this? They charge an amount to the household who pays for the emptying. The amount they charge includes the amount they are going to pay for dumping. And this is working very well, especially in the city where the fecal sludge treatment plant is under a large utility. I still insist. For small companies, for small treatment plants, nothing is working. But for large utilities, the household is able to pay money to the emptier, and that emptier has charged an amount that includes dumping fee. So they pay to the treatment plant for the running of the plant. And I think this is, for me, how I see that it is going to work. Otherwise, doing it in reverse is very difficult.
I can't.
Thank you.
I come back to this at the end. Just forgive me, because I was provoked by all the talk to just sharpen this. It's a thought. It's not the end of our conversation. I just want to leave it. I think you've heard from Param very clearly, one point of view. There will be other points of view. We need to discuss this further. Just hold on. Just hold on. Okay. Okay. If you're saying so, Rupa, please go ahead.
In our municipal corporation act, when there is a sewerage area,
Ah.
we can impose the sewerage tax.
That's right.
In non-sewered area, we can't
That's right.
impose the tax. When we are providing the services, so we can say that year area is now sewered, so sewer tax can be imposed on these houses, and within 4 years, if we emptying the septic tank, so 200 rupees per annum it comes. So everybody can give it if we keep the schedules desilaging with imposing the sanitary tax.
Good
there
idea.
will
That's
be no
another very
problem at
good
all.
model. That's a very good
For
model as
sewage
well.
tax, in every municipal act.
But
this is-
see, that means that the municipality will collect, and I
Yes.
think just let's hold on, because I think this country needs a lot more models to work and for us to document. I think we're basically, I think what we've heard from Param, I would say should be our Bible to say, we need to make sure it's affordable, it's inclusive, and this is a public service and a public health charge. How this happens, let's look at it, okay? So I'm going to ask you, please, I know you have, we'll come back to it, okay? I now want the next group to come in because we are now moving to the next end. That's why I'm sort of taking this. We had the whole question about regulation up till now it's about biosolids. What do you do with what comes out of the plant? And in the plants that we have, it's basically dewatering, huge amount of biosolids. How do you use it? What is the resource recovery, or should we just dump it? That was what this group was charged to tell us. So can this group, and I know Karthik is not speaking, but Sohana is speaking. So Sohana, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll take you through the discussion of our group, and I'll take you through how we did it. We didn't look at policy first. We actually started talking about the research areas to begin with, because what we realize and what the discussion is that with biosolids, we have a lot of questions. We know that we have a large volume being generated, but what it is, how much it is exactly based on treatment systems, etc., there are a lot of question marks. So that really helped us frame that we really need a lot of research, particularly around characterizations, to understand what is actually being generated. And because based on that is how we would be able to determine reuse pathways. And because we had Karthik in the group, you will see the virtual biosolid pathway modeling systems coming in. And that is something to be considered, that as we do the characterization, to be able to use the newer tools and newer models that are available to actually be more accurate. And to do this before we have plants, et cetera, set up, because we can do scenario analysis and understand what might be the future perspective of putting in a solution system in a particular location. Along with that, the other piece that really has to be understood is quality and quantity of biosolids being generated. And because there are different treatment systems and each one really gives a different quality of biosolid as the end product, this becomes an important piece that has to be charted. Aside from this, of course, in terms of quality and quantity, again, there are a lot of question marks around what actually is in the final load in terms of, say, pathogens, in terms of heavy metals, toxicity, and so on. And without knowing these, the applications that might happen may have much more further impacts downstream. So again, the piece around understanding what actually is being generated out of all of our treatment systems is very important. And to be able to do all of these, really, we need a much more standardized protocol in how biosolids would be tested in laboratory setups and so on. We heard from some of the speakers yesterday that right now that's quite absent, and there's a gap between where collection happens to when it's actually getting tested. A lot of our treatment systems, say larger STPs and so on, do have labs attached. But again, is this piece around biosolids being tested? That really is a missing piece. And based on all of these research areas, I'm sure there are more. This is very distilled from a much larger conversation that we're having, and I'm sure it requires many more conversations as well. But based on these first few steps, we started trying to understand who would be the collaborators who would be needed to actually take this material, the biosolids that are being generated, and therefore put it into a reuse framework and, sort of close the loop in this production. And recognizing, of course, that wherever we have wastewater treatment systems, whether STPs or FSTPs or any other system that might emerge, biosolids sort of are the end product that are coming out of it. And therefore, we sort of split it into who might be users, and clearly, agriculture seems to be a large endpoint of where biosolids would go. And therefore, that immediately brings in, say, agricultural universities and so on to help us understand what sort of uses would be possible. We know from anecdotal evidence that agriculturists use it. We know of cases from different cities where farmers from really far away may come to the city, STPs and FSTPs, and pick up sludge. We know of examples where FSTPs are actually trying to monetize the sludge and make it into a soil conditioner. But again, these are anecdotal. We really need to build more on that. And this is where we need the collaboration between our agricultural universities and our local bodies to try and understand how this can be more streamlined, why it works in certain cities, why it doesn't work in certain cities. The other piece in terms of an end user would be industries. And again, that's where, say, bodies like IFCO and so on need to be a part of this collaboration to understand what sort of higher value products might be possible based out of the treatment systems that are being applied. And again, when we look at the agricultural piece, because of that, of course, say rural departments, Panchayati Raj, Krishi Vigyan Kendras sort of become the a body to look at because they are again really the endpoint and are going to be the local stakeholders and need to be part of this discussion. At the same time, when we look at the monitoring and regulatory piece, that's where, say, state pollution control boards would need to come in and be part of this entire exercise. Again, based on the fact that we have question marks on quality and quantity, and based on what emerges out of our quality research is where our state pollution control boards will help us enforce certain requirements. And we do have startups and innovators, again, as collaborators in this space. I am sort of thinking of in terms of aggregator models because we have all of these FSTPs, STPs producing, biosolids across different cities. Is there scope for bringing this together, scaling, so that there are, there's aggregation happening so that larger products or, scalable products can be made out of it. But that's another point. And again, the point with innovators being that sometimes we don't know what are the ideas that would emerge. So we do need them as part of this exercise. And also looking at research institutes. Again, as I said, we had in deference to the people in the group, why very specifically Colombia is mentioned. But again, the fact that we have a lot of potential international contribution, that not just international, but just research institutes that can be part of this. Again, going back to the fact that there's so many question marks in this whole space as of now, whether it's in our testing protocols, whether it is in our modeling protocols, this is where a lot of research institutes can help us collaborate. And based on all of this research, discussion on what research and what collaboration is possible is what led us to what sort of policy agenda we would need to look at. One thing that we sort of are quite clear on, that as part of the national action on plan on circular economy, that really needs to extend to recognize that biosolids are something that are to be considered, because that's again as we have a blind spot, that's when we sort of miss out on what do we do with it. That's at the national level scale, because that would drive a certain amount of the decision making that would happen at the more local bodies. But then at the ULB level, because this is something that's being generated at a much more local scale, because as we know, wastewater streams are at the local scale. At the ULB level also, we would need to have bodies, but probably the ULB itself, who is going to have a large chunk of the responsibility on how reuse would happen. Maybe some of the planning and decision making and the governance would be there, and we still give scope for entrepreneurs, et cetera, to be part of the ecosystem, but the ULB would have to be a driving force. I'll skip the extended producer responsibility for a moment. The other piece is, because this is a new sort of segment that we need to look at, there will definitely be CapEx, OpEx related to what sort of testing is happening, and that needs to be built into our sort of construction systems or implementation systems for FSTPs and STPs, so that we do need to recognize that these are the bodies who are actually going to be the producers. So having testing facilities, et cetera, need to be part of the system there. And going back to the EPR, I think that's, maybe it's a bit of an overreach, but at some point as a society, we need to talk of where are, the biosolids that are being generated, what is actually contributing to it, Is it because of the sort of detergents and soaps and shampoos we use? Is that contributing? In which case it really becomes a question of producers from that scale and having policy to change, which I know that certain European and developed countries are moving towards. Maybe it's a much more longer trajectory here in India, but something that is to be considered, that extended producer responsibility may need to be applied. Two other points that we haven't put in here, but sort of my reflections, and I would welcome the group to sort of add or descend on that. We can call them a little bit of an upstream thought and a downstream thought. So one is in terms of the upstream thought, the biosolids that are generated because of a particular wastewater treatment system. What dictates the wastewater treatment system that's put in place is guidelines on what the wastewater, so the effluent quality has to be, which therefore means that depending on effluent quality requirements, we may be putting in systems which do not give us high quality biosolids, which give us very low quantity of biosolids and so on. Now, if we are looking at having a circular economy with biosolids and we make that a product that we are, productizing and commodifying, then the question becomes that, do you want treatment systems in place which allow you to generate biosolids? So that's an upstream question, which is probably sort of a parallel discussion to have on how wastewater is being treated. Right now, the focus is on treatment. It's not so much yet on the resource recovery part. If we move to that, then that's a point to be considered. And from a downstream perspective, particularly because we looked at agriculture as sort of an endpoint of a lot of which would probably be able to take a large volume of biosolids if it's correctly created. The question becomes that in that case, biosolids are competing with traditional chemical fertilizers, which has an entire subsidized market. So how would we be able to counter that becomes a question as well. So I'll end with that. Thank you.
Yes, Patrick, other than saying that it wasn't Columbia University, but
Happy to, but that was not me. But the point I would very quickly like to make is maybe we should stop using the term sludge and biosolids, which conveys something negative. Instead, we had proposed the use of the term feedstock.
yeah, very nice. Or a soil conditioner or something like that. Very, very important. Yes. Okay, I gave you a chance. Just hold on. I will give two others at this end a chance right now. Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I think the group did justice to that topic. For me, it's a topic of interest because we're really exploring in Zambia the valorization of fecal sludge. And it's an open discussion that is really undergoing a lot of formation per se, formative stage. I think the question really, based on what has been shared, is what sort of outcomes thought around the energy sector have been considered. I think that wasn't really highlighted. So I wonder whether that really exists and what sort of considerations do you have in this context? Thank you.
Good, good, good. Yes, last point.
So for biosolids in Indian context,
Little
First-
louder.
for biosolids in Indian context, it should be focused on where it is coming from, like railways and other also produce biosolids. So thermal treatment can be a good opportunity to convert that into biochar, and that can be utilized in brick manufacturing or any kind of admixture purposes. So that was one thing that can be included. And second thing, taking the sanitation practices and EcoSan, we can have Terra Petra as a better solution for biosolids.
Yeah, I think we're trying to move beyond technology options. I think, Rupaji, one question that we have, and I picked it up from the group, and I just want to highlight that from the groups, because I think it's a very important policy question moving forward, is we obviously need better standards for the products. Now, pollution standards right now are designed for STPs, which are designed for water, waste plants, for discharge into water, treated effluent into water. So what is happening is in the standards is that they are designed for removing the nitrogen, removing the phosphorus, because obviously nitrogen you don't want to discharge into water because it'll add to eutrophication. Now, for most of us who are interested in reuse, we want that to go back to land. To go back to land, you want higher nitrogen. And what you've got country standards right now is to first remove the nitrogen, then reapply it on land. Okay. So if I'm old enough to tell you that in the first generation of pollution standards in this country, there used to be different standards based on the receiving media. If you were applying it on land, if you were applying it on water, if you were applying it somewhere else. I think given the biosolid and the interest, because there was huge discussion, and it's an issue that we will keep coming back to you in this year, all of us. But I think it's important for us because if we are adopting a non-water-based sewage system, then we also have to think about a non-water-based discharge system and a reuse system. And what does that take in terms of standard setting? I'm not going to get into the details of what they are, but just a framing of the issue that we are now struggling with, all of us. Because if we don't do that, we will find that all this material, as in places where there are FSTPs, they will not meet any standards that operate today. So I think that's going to be a very important part of the resource recovery that your government now and has really emphasized as one of the top priorities. So we'll have to work to find better opportunities. Last group, Param, if you can come up. Very important issue of rural-urban convergence on both treated and used water. You see how we are beginning, Chaurasia ji, to take up your terminology. We don't call it wastewater anymore. You have taught us, it's all used water now.
So good afternoon, everybody. So as instructed, we have prepared only 2 slides. Therefore, the slide looks slightly cumbersome. My apologies for that. So to start with, the mandate given to our group was how best we should converge the various things, whether it's infrastructure, whether financials, whatever the case may be, what kind of convergence can happen so that there is best utility for everyone involved. So first thing we took relating to the used water that comes out, whether it is from the sewage treatment plants or whether it is coming from the fecal sludge treatment plant. Again, we are not restricting either to rural or urban or peri-urban. The policy, what we are proposing is for all the regions. The first thing we would like to, before getting into convergence, is the simple policy of reduce, reuse, and recycle. And that should happen in situ, so that the capex and the opex expenditures are drastically reduced. Today, in the rural setting, by and large, the idea has picked up thanks to JJM and SBM phase 2. But given the context in our urban areas and the geographical constraints, being that many houses are very cramped for spaces, in situ should be the default option. If there are spatial or other constraints, then the local community, the community should be maybe within that street. Can we contain the wastewater in some way? Simple recharging of the ground. Only in cases where, whether in-house or inside the same street, we are unable to contain the wastewater, we should try to design systems for treating them beyond that locality. And that also should be as decentralized as possible, so that there will be multiple advantages. First thing will be that the moment we are having in situ, then water conservation effect also goes on. The second thing, even in places where, let's say, we are unable to do it at the in situ level, we have to do it at a decentralized location. Then depending on the location, we can decide what will be the use of such wastewater will be. For instance, in Delhi, which is a very, very big area, having 2.5 crore population. Suppose if there are multiple sewage treatment plants being set up, let's say across 4 or 5 locations, Then depending on the locality, it can be decided in some location, it may require that this wastewater can be supplied to industry. In some location, there may be maybe near Haryana border where some agricultural activity is going on, and therefore you can supply this water for agricultural purposes. In other places for maybe any other use. Therefore, more the decentralized approach, again, our land issues, public resistance also becomes lesser. However, it will be slightly administratively difficult because of multitude of projects, time, and these constraints are there, but in the long term, it will be a better option. So as we have listened to Karnataka yesterday, they are trying to do the sewage water treated and subsequently pumped into some ponds for recharging, and even then subsequently taking into some other villages for agricultural activities. So that is also one of the option in such decentralized locations based on a need. So it can allow us to do some pond creation and water can be stored. And one of the suggestion was that can we also integrate, of course, assume that there is adequate volumes of water coming from that, the existing canal systems which are created in certain areas, if we can integrate into that also during the dry season, it may help out. The second thing that some of the members were very particular is that we have to take a data-driven approach. Because in India, because of such vast diversity in terms of ecology, economic status, social issues, depending on the context in which we want to do the wastewater treatment, first we have to understand what is the generation, what are the issues that prevent us from having a proper treatment. Only with such data, probably the solution has to come. Otherwise, if we try to bring a governmental approach of okay, these are the 1, 2, 3 options, then sometimes it may be difficult to fit into any of these buckets. The other important aspect was how to ensure the sustainability of whatever we are doing. Suppose the most important thing in the reuse of waters, all of us are aware that many of the STPs which have been created earlier, I mean, even for 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, the end connection could not happen, meaning the government created the network, but the connection from the house to that sewage could not happen because people did not agree for breaking their already constructed house. So what exactly is to be done? It's not very easy, it's difficult, but a strong stakeholder mobilization, whether it is involving all the beneficiaries, that has to be done. And there has to be backed up by some kind of financial disincentive for people who are not taking it forward. Unless the people are first convinced in principle that this is required, even though initially some inconvenience and subsequently it has to be done. Secondly, after such convincing that the government goes hammer and tongs to them, saying that if you are not doing it, such and such penalty will be enforced, it may be very difficult to do a sewage, I mean, line. Of course, that should be the last option. Wherever we have to create a sewage treatment plant, that has to be ensured. The second thing relates to creating user groups below the ward level representatives, at least in urban and peri-urban areas. One of the important suggestions that has come is that in JJM rural, we are creating village water and sanitation committees. So this in some sense creates some kind of ownership in the public as a discourse as to how to ensure better water treatment, better septage, sewage, etc., etc. But in urban areas, as of now, the hierarchy stays at ward level, ward member, etc. So probably we may have to look at something kind of Basti representative or something, whereby slightly more interaction between the government and the people involved happens, so that whatever policy we want to push gets percolated and gets compliance. And especially in peri-urban areas, which is not as rapid as in some other countries, but definitely which is growing and a cause of concern for India. Even in the existing central areas, we don't have well-planned networks for collecting the wastewater. Now, again, random growth is happening in the peri-urban areas. Therefore, it becomes extremely crucial. Such stakeholder groups are made, and then some kind of planning before the issue gets too complicated and too difficult. Some planning by the developmental authorities or the regional improvement trust may have to be looked at for sewage treatment. Capacity building, of the various urban bodies. Already couple of our earlier groups have also mentioned, it's very important to make the even the government representatives at various levels understand the significance of having these trainings and the models and why that is being done. Regarding financials, for the water also, like the way most of the states pay a very nominal charge for using a fresh water for agriculture purpose, because agriculture is a very financially stressful activity even today. And with more and more urbanization, more and more economic development, it will become more and more challenging because of the input cost will continue to rise. Therefore, it's also the responsibility of the government to reduce the stress on the farmers. So whatever cost that we want to charge for the wastewater, if at all it is to be given to agricultural purposes, it should not be a recovery basis on the treatment, but on the basis of whatever is the upper limit fixed for the fresh water. However, if it is for industrial, most of the states even today give at a differential pricing, and therefore that pricing should continue for industrial use because industries have the capacity to pay. One of the suggestions which had come from a member was, since government has created a good buzz in terms of creating water conservation through Amrit Sarovar program across various rural areas where thousands and thousands of tanks are being constructed. In such location, again unique, it's linked to that pond system. Can we also create exclusive ponds for the wastewater coming in so that it can help in recharging? Coming to the second topic of how to ensure fecal sludge that is being taken out, or even the sewage sludge that may come from the sewage treatment plant in the various locations. The first thing is that how do we use the sludge? Ma'am, yesterday also we had a very long discussion. The previous theme 4 also had a lot of deliberation. There are a lot of things that has to emerge in terms of the standards, in terms of the process involved for the creation of the biosolids, in terms of how do we ensure their marketability, etc., etc. This entire field is today totally in an open ground because a lot of questions remain unanswered. Therefore, for the fecal sludge that is coming out, the first thing is that we need to have a workable norm fixed so that it can be sold. Today, the norms are for vegetable compost waste, which may or may not match with our fecal waste. Therefore, there is a need for having a clear-cut norm. Number 2 will come the marketability and convincing the various public, and the process involved, as you have also mentioned, whether in the process of looking at a sanitized water outflow, are we trying to reduce the nutrition content of the compost and thereby reducing the value? That is also something needs to be pondered. In case some locations may demand energy extraction from the sewage septate, and that is financially and ecologically a viable solution that can also be looked at, especially in fresh fecal sludge coming from railway tracks and things like that, where if methane extraction on anything can be done, that can also be looked at. As regarding convergence in terms of the treatment process is concerned, the first choice should be that the facilities created in the urban localities that should be fully leveraged. Because in most, again, Odisha is a leading member, but most of the members also accepted in almost all of these states now, there are fecal sludge treatment plants partly operational in many of the urban areas, and they will continue to remain underutilized at least for the next 5 to 10 years, whatever projection we may done, it might not be in the real scenario. Therefore, the first thing is to make best use of the resources already created and to ensure that the responsibility has to be clearly bifurcated between the urban bodies and the rural bodies. Because wherever we are going for convergence, naturally, because already the ULB has a system of collection and deposit in that fecal sludge treatment plant. Their existing system should continue. In each state, individual ULB may have different protocol of collection, different protocol of treatment that should continue. The responsibility of collecting the fees again in advance from such rural households should be with the Grama Panchayat, and ensuring that the cesspool vehicle, when it comes from the urban area to collect it, that there is no hassle faced by such operator, that should be ensured by the Grama Panchayats concerned. And the twin pit toilets being a the general norm, although not actually implemented in the field, now that the government of India is also realizing and going for a campaign, even that may take maybe 3 years, 4 years to have a realistic twin pit completion in everywhere. But that being a permanent solution, creating exclusive fecal sludge treatment plants for rural areas should be taken on a case-to-case basis where there is a very high population load. It may be called rural, for instance, in Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and in the morning one speaker told Bihar, even though it is called rural, there are several spaces where there is heavy population density. Perhaps in such location, there may be a requirement of exclusive fecal sludge treatment plant in rural areas. But unless the financial and the logistics are very clearly visible, we should not go ahead in creating in our enthusiasm for FSTP now, that is a buzz for last 4 years, which is good, but we should not go and create some assets which may not be fully utilized. And regarding equity, inclusion and justice, of course, whatever is the product coming out, whether it is the wastewater or whether it is the compost that is coming, we have to prioritize between if there is a actual demand for the wastewater coming for agricultural purpose, then it has to be prioritized over the industrial need for equity purposes. And between groups, let's say if water is required and there is somebody who is already having some water availability, then it has to be prioritized for the other group. So I think these are the points. Our group, I would like to thank Eva and our other participants, and because Eva had prepared the presentation. Thank you.
So now I'd like to find your experience, your understanding of this sector. How do you
also need a group, at least 7 to 8 people for my group. Otherwise, I'm abandoned here. You had all groups, you had all teammates, you had all people to give you inputs. So I need now 6 to 7 volunteers who will be my group. Okay, given that, you're all there. The biggest group. All right. So I'd like to start off with something. After being, for the past 1.5 hours, I've been listening to all of you. And if we make a compilation of all that you said, that's what nations need, right? There is nothing additional that I can add to it because you all have covered it all. And all of you bring in facets based on your experience, somebody from an administrative perspective, somebody from a research perspective, from market perspectives, from technical perspectives. You've brought it all already. In fact, Sunita ji, it would be wonderful if all of it is consolidated, properly docketed, a little more systematized when all the input points come in. And that's going to truly define and aid us in our path as we move forward. So taking a cue from where I left my last sentence, what we are doing right now and where we are is very much. So this is work in progress. This sector is work in progress. Okay. And I can actually walk out from here with this, 3 alphabets. I'd like to add one more word, this. Serious work in progress. Okay, and especially when you're talking about a nation like India, it's very serious work in progress. All right. Now to that, I'll add 2 more words. Serious work in progress, 2 more SSS. Training needed. With speed and skill. All right. So while of course this is serious work in progress, but we are seeing serious speed and serious skill. So that is what makes our journey all the more fascinating. And I have learned one thing in my past 2 decades of work. That is, none of us exist in isolation. None of us can perform in isolation. And none of us should think in isolation. So to act together, we must think together. And I thank you for bringing this group of thinking like-minded people together to think on such an important topic. So while there is speed, there is scale, there are challenges, there is a lot of thing that has been done, there is a lot of thing that has to be done. As I said, we are not here in isolation. What does that mean? One thing I have realized that today, more than ever before, the whole of government approach is absolutely essential. Pick up any sector, we cannot look at that sector in isolation. So if you're talking about sanitation, we have to think of water, we have to think of agriculture, we have to think of standards, we have to think of industry, we have to think of investment, we have to think of infra, we have to think of maybe startups and innovations, maybe HRD in terms of technology and knowledge hub, and IT in terms of efficiency. There is no way we can think of sanitation as a sector in isolation. So coming back to the whole of government approach, again, we cannot look at, let us say, the 27th of April 2023 as the day, or let us say the 1st of October 2021 when Swachh Bharat Phase 2 was started, or the 19th of, let us say, or the 40 or the 15th of August when so and so missions were kind of advocated by the political leadership of this nation. While these are huge points where great curves came into the country, we have to also see the continuum of learning basis which we are here, because learnings give us our successes also, the reasons to celebrate, and learnings give us what we have done which hasn't worked in the past and what we need to do differently or completely avoid maybe. Therefore, an extremely important learning as we move ahead, and what is a sum up of all the 5 groups that I have heard, I will again like to put up in 4 alphabets. All right. Okay. So 4 alphabets. No, there is no black pen. Okay, we can use a green. Okay. So how do we take our learning curve ahead, and how do we come up with those 4 alphabets, which will give us, again, the learnings or the summation of all that my friends have mentioned in the past 1 hour. And those are did I do a mistake? No, it's not a mistake. It's a very conscious effort of repeating that same alphabet 4 times. And this is how I would sum up the learnings of India's past near decade of an approach that we have been following with consistency, perseverance, and experience scale. And how do I put it? Yeah, we have disappearing things also. Okay. But that's the most important one. So the approach that we have followed till now has actually taken the strength, drawn the strength from these 4 fields. And wherever that we are, wherever that we will be going ahead, we'll keep on growing from the strengths of these 4. And this is extremely important from a point of policy and derived action. So given today, all these 4, are crucial, I would like to again draw a thread to something which was the highlight of this year. We've had various highlights during this year, but the highlight that I would like to touch upon this year was the union cabinet, the union budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister. What were the key things for this sector which was there in the budget speech? Which was there in the budget speech? What do you want me to do? This is not audible at the back? Okay, that's because I was turning. Okay. All right. All right. Okay. We'll have a little more stability. Let's use this one. All right. So I'd like to draw your attention to what is crucial for this sector in the budget speech. And that is not just budget speech, as all of you in the sector would know, that actually determines government policies, investments, confidence of the market, building up of partnerships, whole lot of investment that gets into this sector, and much, much more. First, there was a statement by the finance minister which strongly spoke of waste to wealth plants. Now, while some may say that this may have been specifically mentioned in the context of solid waste, because what came thereafter in the speech was the mention of Gobardhan specifically, I would say that waste to wealth is not something which is restricted to solid waste only. And waste to wealth is India's approach of anything that is used right now. And that applies both for solid waste as well as used water, number one. So when from the topmost level, the intent is waste to wealth and resource recovery, it is absolutely pertinent for all of us in this sector to completely relook, re-gauge, reassess, and move ahead, depending on whatever needs to be reworked. The second thing that was mentioned was very clear terms of community, decentralized, and 75 urban areas, meaning there is an understanding at the highest level, and that understanding comes from a bottom-up approach that one size will not fit all in a nation like India. And we will need different solutions. There could be community approaches, there could be small plans, there could be large plans. Cities could require a different approach. Rural areas could be talking of a different approach. There could also be a cluster-based convergent approach. So if you fine read that paragraph, it spells out the essence for this sector. And for me, who's spent my last 10 years working only in the sectors of health, water, and sanitation, I see this as a huge jump in terms of the intent and the incentives that it spells for the sector. The second thing that was there in FM's speech for our interest was the high focus on tier 2 and tier 3 cities. For the first time, government comes in strongly with a clear, unambiguous intent of approach and action for tier 2, tier 3 cities, knowing well that that's where India of tomorrow action would lie. And a new announcement for Urban Infrastructure Development Fund comes in with a whopping 10,000 crores investment into the sector. Usually what happens, whenever new schemes come, they speak of new projects, isn't it? This time when Urban Infrastructure Development Fund has come in, and very soon you will see the blueprint of the document, it speaks of ongoing projects, expansion projects, upgradation projects, renovation projects, greenfield projects, water, sanitation, waste, all of it being priority. This gives a lot of impetus to the gap filling that would be required many times in these cities as far as VGF is concerned, wherever mission funds kind of leave a gap. The third thing which I found of great interest in in the, in the budget speech was a strong focus on reforms agenda. Whatever, friends, that you were discussing here is nothing but reforms. You spoke here of financing models. You spoke of state support. You spoke of partial recovery. You spoke of viability of projects. You spoke of PPPs. You spoke of standards that bring in quality. All of it is the reforms agenda. And reforms agenda clearly again spells out a 15,000 crores, wherein a city brings about projects that have viability inbuilt, and viability does not necessarily mean a complete recovery of O&M, but a long-term operations maintenance sustainability in whichever way the project would conceptualize given the local conditions. Now, these are extremely strong policy statements when it comes to upping the game of especially the small cities. What would be required here is innovation and ideation to model these kind of projects. And nowhere is there a restriction that you cannot take this, you cannot take that. Even if you've taken a particular project, that project has actually not worked, you learn from it and you change its track. So that precious land is not wasted, time is not wasted, energy is not wasted. The fourth thing which I see of great interest and which has significance to our sector is a mention on PM Pranam. PM Pranam clearly indicates government's intention to have organic and other fertilizers or biosoils or organic manures to substitute the chemical fertilizer chain. So the moment this kind of a thing comes in, the work, Sunita ji, that will start, that has already started, is serious discussion between Chemical Fertilizer Ministry, Agriculture Ministry, BIS, Niti Aayog, Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation, Ministry of Housing, Agriculture, etc. Because each one of us is trying to now bring in our learnings as to what is it from my sector that will go as a feed, if not in complete substitution, but at least as an augmentation. And that's where MoHUA is pitching different standards for this particular sector and not to look all of it in the same scale of one standard FCO norms. So that pitch has already begun. And in fact, what we have been told is to get case study test samples to pitch our case better. So in case you will have all of it, I would be indeed grateful to have a compilation of the same. We can have a discussion, and this discussion, friends, has already begun. And at the same time, we have also started the, in fact, it's in very advanced stages, the discussion on whether MDA can be extended to these kind of sectors. So the moment you start these discussions, of course, they have their own method of actually happening, but data is what is going to help us in these pitchings and take the scale in our favor. So I would request any kind of evidence, data, tests that can come to strengthen our case as a very strong, I would say, player in the PM Pranam ecosystem. The next thing that I would like to mention is all of us are aware that the demographics in terms of the rural-urban shift is vast, is fast changing. And in the budget discussions, you were very much present. You must have heard that very strong statement that came about planning of new cities. Till now, we have very few planned cities in the country. Cities have just grown on their own. Peripheries are just growing on their own. So what is happening, be it water, be it sanitation, be it whichever service, we are following wherever the settlement is going. It's not reverse. So be it large societies, which can jolly well be zero waste or zero discharge colonies, or new cities that are evolving, that are being planned, a very strong component needs to go in terms of capacity, town planning, methods of design to incorporate aspects of water, sanitation from the beginning itself. So today we see that town planning, urban planning is an area where many states are struggling. Sometimes in one state, there is one town planner, there is one architect. And as you go down, the ladder gets even leaner and leaner. Therefore, people who understand the way urban planning and design is happening, septage, no septage, sanitation, the capex of it, what is a viable model, how we're going to plan it, what will be the bylaws there, how do we enforce the bylaws, all of it needs people who can work with cities to think, ideate, and design for the future. Today, if we don't design, we will have serious issues the way our cities are expanding. And I can see a lot of young faces there. When India reaches 47, many of us would have retired. You and me would be, we would be sipping tea together, but they would be the ones who would be sitting there actually seeing India turn into 100. And that time you will look back at this point of time when India is 75 as to what is the future leaning policy and action we have invested when we had the will and ability into the system, which has taken our nation and our cities on the right track. Now, friends, given this as the feeder material that strikes my mind at the very advent that comes from the budget, I see nothing but positive times for this journey ahead. And we already have, which my friend has thankfully kept on the whiteboard, the 4 Ps that will give us huge impetus. Now, given India's policy, the policy is very clear. I need not repeat it because you all have discussed, disseminated, dissected, analyzed, and done everything on the policy. But what is the gap is what many of you have already mentioned is regarding standards, advisories, guidelines, benchmarks, design norms, etc. This is the sector where we are yet to work on it. And more the people, more the ideas that come into it, better would be the journey for the states and cities. In India, you would appreciate that be it water, be it sanitation, be it health, even though these are state subjects, the approach of India has been to work in a nature of cooperative federalism in these particular sectors, not shying away that this is a state subject, this is something which is delegated to the city. Neither does the government of India sit quiet, nor do the state governments just kind of wash away their hands, giving the entire responsibility to GPs and to ULBs, nor do the ULBs or GPs shirk away from taking support and the strength from all these different layers of government. So these are sectors in which all 3 levels of government are truly working together, supplementing each other's strength. And given that there is absolutely no dearth in terms of intent, in terms of will, in terms of financing, what is actually required today? I'm just coming from Sunitaji. Yesterday, I went to, for 3 days, I was in Uttarakhand. I visited the Ganga town of Haridwar and I visited Mussoorie, I visited Dehradun also. A friend of mine put up this, the presentation which was there on the biosludge, and that you mentioned that we do not use the word sludge, but feedstock. Okay. There, what has happened is the STP is there. One particular private developer just to try out, has taken the dry sludge and he's converting it into bio-CNG and selling it at 97 rupees per kilo. All right, 97 rupees. And he finds it a system, economics that completely works for him. He has been working on it for the past 2-3 years now. It is fully commissioned 6 months back, and is very, very positive that given the kind of feed and support that was there from the city, this is a scalable model. But seeing it, it was, of course, I spent a few minutes there. It will take a little time to study the economics, the viability of it, but the developer is full of enthusiasm. The city finds its sludge going into a absolutely good value chain and into the gas value chain. You must have heard our minister who spoke at length about petrochemicals and the value chain of petrochemicals. So we are not very far away from that chain, and it makes sense for minister to be speaking on that. But I did see a project there. Now, scalability, feasibility, standards, all of it, we need to see a little closer. I will be sending a team next week to Uttarakhand to look at that. So even within our priority of saturation, there are cities where we are prioritizing even farther, even faster, which are the cities which are besides the Ganga and besides the major rivers and water bodies for natural reasons. The other thing which I saw, you mentioned of tipping fee. For the first time, I saw a waste processing plant that was paying the processing fee and not the tipping fee. The reason I say these things are, when I mentioned that we do not operate in isolation and we have to take our learning curve of the past decade ahead, sanitation in terms of access to toilets, water supply in terms of universal water coverage, solid waste management in terms of India truly changing its game of door-to-door collection and transportation and taking it to certain places and having some amount of processing depending on the efficacies that's there. Learning from these 3 curves, we already know which are the aspects we need to address now in this sector. You all mentioned a very, very important value chain decoding of whose responsibility should be the collection, how should we price it, what should be the frequency, how do we monitor it, what kind of a vehicle capacity, what kind of equipment, where are the unloading points, do we need interim points, who runs the plants, how do you make payments to the plants, what happens to the exit of the final byproducts which are there of the process, how does it meet the end of life, how do we have resource recovery from it. Friends, if you take a moment to think of it, is it not the value chain that we have addressed to a great extent in water, to a great extent in health, to a great extent in solid waste management? Those are also works in progress, but maybe we've done a little more there. Now that in the first few years, our primary focus was as a nation to ensure that we first address the aspect of safety and access, now is the time when we are completely changing our gears and putting our energy together towards addressing the remaining part of it, because all of us know that these are journeys that can be taken step by step and not just straight away, because there are levels that you need to address. And therefore, today, I would request all of you, we are looking for this to make a lot of impact at the state and city level. This being given, this being there, we of course need ideation and good projects, but this is continuously there, of course. This is what will be a very key, I would say, driver in terms of action, thought, learning, relearning at the state and city level. And that's where all of you have a great role to play. So be it in form of research, be it in terms of documentation, be it working with the states and the central ministry, especially because I can assure that in terms of helping us build guidelines, standards, technical advisories that actually are implementable and make sense and are truly reflecting the voice of the ground, I take this opportunity to invite all of you, by whichever mechanism, Sunita ji, you can think you can bring them together. We can create a network also for this specifically. Somebody mentioned a good network. What was that? One of you mentioned it. Collaboration ke slide mein aapne mention kiya tha. A federation. So we can actually think of it, but there needs to be continuous, I would say, back and forth dialogue, going to the fields, having our ears, eyes close to the ground, and a lot of work actually needs to be done here. And all the externalities which support the environment, I can assure you, are there. The external conditions that decide the success or failure of a sector are absolutely positive in India. And if this is not the time, and this is not the environment in which we can crack it, then I wonder which would be the time and what would be that environment. Having said that, I thank you. I compliment each one of you for having spent 3 days, right? 2.5 days, not 3 days, discussing about what my friends and everybody calls us, that we are the potty team, we are the waste team, we are the garbage team, we are the toilet team. I'm happy to be all of that. I'm happy to be part of all of it. So let's be the toilet team, garbage team, potty team, susu team, all of it. But we will continue, and let's scale up this game of sanitation, this journey of sanitation. And the next few years will be, trust me, the most exciting ones that we would have ever seen. Thank you, all of you, and all the very best.
Post Rupaji's brilliant speech, helping us to understand both the need for scale, speed, the opportunity that today we have, and the invitation to all of us that we need to partner, give advice, information, but help to guide and mold this forward. I don't have anything to add, and I'm not going to open up the floor further, because I think, Rupaji, you have actually said it so brilliantly that none of us can add to it. Okay. So once again, a big hand for with this, Rupaji, we will conclude our 2.5 days. You have set, I think all teams have given a very clear research agenda. My colleagues and we will now put this together in more in terms of what is the learning that has come, and we will definitely share it with you. We will also point out where we think are some of the gaps that have been pointed out, which need to be worked on, and those are urgent, and we will work on that as well. Before I let you go, I have one task that I would like you to do. We have 2 reports, and I would like to invite my colleagues from the laboratory, because Rupaji, what you have asked for, we will be writing to you officially, but I wanted a moment for these reports to be released. These are 2 reports, one on, exactly as you asked, the state of fecal sludge treatment plants in India. We have analyzed, Vinod, please come here. Please come, all of you. You're very shy people. Lab people are always, they're hiding in the, please come, idhar up. Come. And the second one also, let's put both of them out. So second report as well, it's on biosolid. The question that you asked for. So in this report, friends, the laboratory team, which is in front of you here, has gone to all the FSTPs, collected samples of biosolid co-treatment, looked at it from the point of view of the current standard, which is compost standard, compared it, told you where are the issues, where are the problems, But the point we have learned from this is we need a review of the standards. And we will come back to you on exactly what that is. But these are two reports which I hope that you will feel happy about, all of you, that we are presenting to you. Thank you. So a lot of the work that you have asked us, we've actually started doing. It's not the end, but, and a lot, the group here is an incredible group, Rupaji. This is a resource that we need to tap. And I think what you have asked for, we will find ways of staying engaged, both individually with you as well as collectively with you. But with that, if I may, thank all of you for coming. But before I thank all of you, can I take a moment to thank my entire team for the incredible work they have put in to organize this. Team which is based in Lucknow, because we are working with the UP government and the FSDPs that are being set up there. Subrat heads that. Dipender, of course, is the overall head. Mithun, don't fall. I'll kill you. Don't fall. नहीं, कोई जरूरत नहीं है. Please, तू नए generation हो, पुराने हो, कोई नहीं. I don't want your leg and arm broken. Yeah. And then, Rupaji, what we have done now is that Dipender is heading the full team. But what we have done for all of you also is that CSE is broken up into 4 verticals. We are looking at the issue of FSTP, technology, regulation. We are looking at the issue of water conservation, because we need to link that. And we are looking at the issue of reuse and reuse standards. So each one, and that is really where I hope we can engage with a larger group here, and we will stay engaged with it. But for the moment, please thank this team, because I'm not responsible for anything that went wrong. They are. From Germany, always dear friend. So thank you everyone for being here. Lunch is served, but before lunch, Dipender tells me group picture, same group photograph at the same place, staircase, first floor lobby. So we walk down.